5.34. 1. Detectives. 2.
Witnesses.
3. Victim. 4.
Murderer.
5. Murder. 6.
Evidence.
7. Suspects. 8.
Solve.
9. Prove. 5.35.
Good morning, and thank you for coming, Mr. Ryan. Or should it be Detective Ryan? You were a detective with the Los Angeles Police Department, weren't you?
Yes, that's right. For 25 years. I retired last year.
People today are still fascinated by Natalie Wood's death, even though it was more than 30 years ago. That's incredible, isn't it?
Well, it's not really that surprising. People are always interested in unsolved mysteries, and Natalie Wood was a well-known and talented actress.
Now, to be clear, none of the people on the boat the night Ms. Wood died were or are suspects. But can you tell us who was on the boat that night?
That is correct. None of them were or are suspects. But in order to get a better understanding about what happened that night, it is important to know who was on the boat. So the people were her husband, movie and TV actor Robert Wagner, her friend and movie actor Christopher Walken, and the captain of the boat, Dennis Davern.
5.36.
Recently, the L.A. County Coroner's Office re-examined Ms. Wood's cause of death because of some new information about the bruises and scratches that were found on her body the night she died.
Yes, that's correct. This new information suggests that Ms. Wood may have been hit or beaten right before she died, and the coroner changed Ms. Wood's original cause of death from accidental drowning to drowning and other undetermined factors.
So what does this mean for the other people on the boat?
Officially, it doesn't mean anything for them. They still aren't suspects.
And you don't think they're suspects, do you?
No, I don't. I don't think any of them can be considered suspects without some kind of convincing evidence.
Well, what about Robert Wagner? There are reports that he was jealous of his wife's friendship with Mr. Walken.
Well, yes. Mr. Wagner wrote in his book, Pieces of My Heart, that he was jealous of the relationship, and that he and Mr. Walken argued that night on the boat. But that doesn't make him a suspect.
And Christopher Walken, Ms. Wood's friend and co-star?
Mr. Walken has remained mostly silent about what happened that night, but he has talked to the police.
The boat captain changed his story about what happened that night, didn't he? That he originally lied to police the night Natalie died.
Yes, Mr. Davern told a TV news program that he lied about the events of that night. He now says that Mr. Wagner and Ms. Wood had an argument, and that Ms. Wood went missing shortly after. Mr. Davern also claims that Mr. Wagner delayed contacting the police, implying that Mr. Wagner was responsible for Ms. Wood's death.
Do you believe the captain's new story?
Well, no. I think the timing of his new story is suspicious, since he released it so close to the 30-year anniversary of her death. I think he was looking to make some money by bringing this sad story back into the news.
So, what do you think happened that night?
I can't tell you, because I don't know.
So you don't think we'll ever solve the mystery?
No, I wouldn't say that. I think one day the mystery will be solved. Some new evidence will appear, and we'll be able to say that Natalie Wood's mysterious death is finally solved. But right now, it's still a mystery, and people like a good mystery.
5.37. 1.
You were a detective with the Los Angeles Police Department, weren't you?
2.
That's incredible, isn't it?
3.
And you don't think they're suspects, do you?
4.
The boat captain changed his story about what happened that night, didn't he?
5.38.
It's cold today, isn't it?
She isn't here today, is she?
You're Peruvian, aren't you?
You aren't angry, are you?
They live in Ankara, don't they?
They don't like pizza, do they?
The game ends at 8 o'clock, doesn't it?
Lucy doesn't eat meat, does she?
Your sister worked in the U.S., didn't she?
You didn't like the movie, did you?
We've met before, haven't we?
Mike hasn't been to Beijing before, has he?
You'll be okay, won't you?
You won't tell anyone, will you?
You'd go on vacation with me, wouldn't you?
Sue wouldn't quit her job, would she?
5.39. Your last name's Jones, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
And you're 27, aren't you?
Yes, that's right.
You weren't at home last night at 8 o'clock, were you?
No, I wasn't. I was at the movie theater.
But you don't have any witnesses, do you?
Yes, I do. My wife was with me.
Your wife wasn't with you, was she?
How do you know?
Because she was with me at the police station. We arrested her yesterday. 5.40. 1. Your last name's Jones, isn't it? 2. And you're 27, aren't you? 3. You weren't at home last night at 8 o'clock, were you? 4. But you don't have any witnesses, do you? 5. Your wife wasn't with you, was she? 5.41. The Case for the Defense by Graham Greene. Part 1.
It was the strangest murder trial I have ever attended. They named it the Peckham Murder in the headlines, although Northwood Street, where Mrs. Parker was found murdered, was not actually in Peckham. The prisoner was a well-built man with bloodshot eyes. An ugly man, one you wouldn't forget in a hurry, and that was an important point. The prosecution intended to call 4 witnesses who hadn't forgotten him and who had seen him hurrying away from the little red house in Northwood Street. At 2 o'clock in the morning, Mrs. Salmon, who lived at 15 Northwood Street, had been unable to sleep. She heard a door shut, and so she went to the window and saw Adams, the accused, on the steps of the victim's house. He had just come out, and he was wearing gloves. Before he moved away, he had looked up at her window. Henry McDougal, who had been driving home late, nearly ran over Adams at the corner of Northwood Street because he was walking in the middle of the road looking dazed. And old Mr. Wheeler, who lived next door to Mrs. Parker at number 12 and was woken up by a noise and got up and looked out of the window, just as Mrs. Salmon had done, saw Adams's back, and as he turned, those bloodshot eyes. In Laurel Avenue, he had been seen by yet another witness.
5.42. Part 2.
I understand,
The lawyer for the prosecution said,
that the defense intends to plead mistaken identity. Adam's wife will tell you that he was with her at 2 in the morning on February the 14th. However, after you have heard the witnesses for the prosecution and examined carefully the features of the prisoner, I don't think you will be prepared to admit the possibility of a mistake.
Mrs. Salmon was called again. She was the ideal witness with her slight Scottish accent and her expression of honesty and kindness. There was no malice in her, and no sense of importance. She told them what she had seen, and how she had rung the police station.
And do you see the man here in court?
She looked straight at the big man in the dock, who stared hard at her with his bloodshot eyes, without emotion.
Yes,
She said.
there he is.
You are quite certain?
She said simply,
I couldn't be mistaken, sir.
Thank you, Mrs. Salmon.
The lawyer for the defense began to cross-examine Mrs. Salmon.
Now, Mrs. Salmon, you must remember that a man's life may depend on your evidence.
I do remember it, sir.
Is your eyesight good?
I've never had to wear spectacles, sir.
You're 55 years old, aren't you?
56, sir.
And the man you saw was on the other side of the road. Is that right?
Yes, sir, he was.
And it was 2 o'clock in the morning. You must have remarkable eyes, Mrs. Salmon.
No, sir. There was moonlight. And when the man looked up, he had the lamplight on his face.
And you have no doubt whatever that the man you saw is the prisoner.
None whatever, sir. It isn't a face you can easily forget.
Part 3.
The lawyer for the defense took a look round the court for a moment. Then he said,
Do you mind, Mrs. Salmon, examining again the people in court? Stand up, please, Mr. Adams.
There at the back of the court, with a well-built body and a pair of bloodshot eyes, was a man who looked exactly like the prisoner. He was even dressed the same, a tight blue suit and a striped tie.
Now, think very carefully, Mrs. Salmon. Can you still swear that the man you saw in Mrs. Parker's garden was the prisoner, and not this man, who is his twin brother? You can't be sure, can you?
Of course she couldn't. She looked from one to the other and didn't say a word. The prisoner sat in the dock, and the other man stood at the back of the court, and they both stared at Mrs. Salmon. She shook her head. That was the end of the case. None of the witnesses were prepared to swear that it was the prisoner he'd seen. The brother had his alibi, too. He had been with his wife. And so the man was acquitted because there was no evidence. But whether he committed the murder, or whether it was his brother, I don't know. That extraordinary day had an extraordinary end. I followed Mrs. Salmon out of the court. There was a big crowd of people outside the courtroom who were waiting, of course, for the twins. The police tried to make the crowd go away, but all they could do was keep the road clear for traffic. The police tried to get the twins to leave by a back door, but they refused. One of them, no one knew which, said,
Why by the back door? I've been acquitted, haven't I?
And they walked out of the front entrance. Then it happened. I don't know how, though I was only 6 feet away. The crowd moved, and somehow one of the twins was pushed onto the road right in front of a bus. He gave a scream, and that was all. He was dead. His brother looked straight at Mrs. Salmon. He was crying, but whether he was the murderer or the innocent man, nobody will ever know. But if you were Mrs. Salmon, could you sleep at night?
Writer.
Have you ever helped a stranger or been helped by a stranger?
Yes. One time I saw somebody have their phone stolen, and I ran after the guy and retrieved the cell phone.
Elizabeth.
Do you think we rely too much on technology?
Yes.
Why?
because technology often breaks and then you don't have the skills that you need to deal with the situation.
Are there any gadgets you just couldn't live without?
I couldn't live without my hairdryer.
Sean. Do you like detective or mystery novels or TV series?
I do, yes.
Do you have a favorite author or detective?
I do like Raymond Chandler and the Philip Marlowe character.
Do you usually guess who the murderer is?
I don't, but I don't usually try to. I think I quite like just to wait and find out what happens.
Isabel.
Do you have a favorite designer?
I think my favourite designer is Alexander McQueen, who's a clothing designer, though it's too expensive so I can't buy any of the clothes, but I like looking at pictures of them.
Why do you like his clothes?
Because they are very, very unusual and they use lots of very interesting materials, and they're different designs, they're not just using designs from the past.
Giles.
Do you think you are generally a lucky person?
Yes, I suppose I think I possibly am a lucky person. I certainly wouldn't count myself as unlucky, but I haven't won the lottery yet, but I'm enjoying life and I think that's possibly as lucky as you can hope to be.
Can you think of a time when you've been really lucky?
Yes, I was very lucky when I was on holiday in Australia and I was due to catch my flight back to England, but I turned up a day late and I'd missed it. But luckily there was one spare space on the plane leaving that day and they were able to put me on it.
5.45. Be, was, were, been.
Beat, beat, beaten.
Become, became, become.
Begin, began, begun.
Bite, bit, bitten.
Break, broke, broken.
Bring, brought, brought.
Build, built, built.
Buy, bought, bought.
Can, could.
Catch, caught, caught.
Choose, chose, chosen.
Come, came, come.
Cost, cost, cost.
Cut, cut, cut.
Do, did, done.
Draw, drew, drawn.
Dream, dreamed, dreamed.
Drink, drank, drunk.
Drive, drove, driven.
Eat, ate, eaten.
Fall, fell, fallen.
Feel, felt, felt.
Find, found, found.
Fly, flew, flown.
Forget, forgot, forgotten.
Get, got, gotten.
Give, gave, given.
go, went, gone.
Grow, grew, grown.
Hang, hung, hung.
Have, had, had.
Hear, heard, heard.
Hit, hit, hit.
Hurt, hurt, hurt.
Keep, kept, kept.
Know, knew, known.
Learn, learned, learned.
Leave, left, left.
Lend, lent, lent.
Let, let, let.
Lie, lay, lane.
Lose, lost, lost.
Make, made, made.
Mean, meant, meant.
Meet, met, met.
Pay, paid, paid.
Put, put, put.
Read, read, read.
Ride, rode, ridden.
Ring, rang, rung.
Run, ran, run.
Say, said, said.
See, saw, seen.
Sell, sold, sold.
Send, sent, sent.
Set, set, set.
Shine, shone, shown.
Shut, shut, shut.
Sing, sang, sung.
Sit, sat, sat.
Sleep, slept, slept.
Speak, spoke, spoken.
Spend, spent, spent.
Stand, stood, stood.
Steal, stole, stolen.
Swim, swam, swum.
Take, took, taken.
Teach, taught, taught.
Tell, told, told.
Think, thought, thought.
Throw, threw, thrown.
Understand, understood, understood.
Wake, woke, woken.
wear, wore, worn.
Win, won, won.
Write, wrote, written.